Guys, this story I'm about to tell you today, man, when this report reached me, I had to verify 3 times if it was real. The guy who sent me this is a biologist who worked at one of the most isolated research stations in the world, in Antarctica. What he discovered there, during a 9-month polar winter with no contact with the outside world. Look, I'll be honest, this completely changed my perspective on what we really know about life on our planet. And maybe you'll understand why this discovery was never officially published. This is one of those stories that makes us question if we're ready for certain truths. My name is Dr. James Whitmore, and I'm a biologist specializing in polar ecology for 15 years. In 2018, I was selected to join a winter research team at McMurdo Station, Antarctica. It was my second polar expedition, but the first time I would spend the complete winter season. 9 months of total darkness, temperatures dropping to 40 degrees, and absolutely zero contact with the outside world. Just 12 researchers studying how life survives in the most extreme conditions on Earth. The project seemed straightforward when we arrived in March, just before the Antarctic winter set in completely. We were tasked with monitoring Weddell seal populations, tracking emperor penguin breeding patterns, and documenting any unusual animal behaviors during the polar night. Standard protocol stuff that I'd done variations of before in Alaska and northern Canada. We had everything planned down to the last detail. Food supplies, communication schedules with base camp, emergency procedures. What we didn't plan for was what we'd find living beneath the ice. For the first 6 weeks, everything went exactly as expected, almost boringly so. We tracked Weddell seals through their breathing holes, documented penguin colonies as they huddled together for warmth. We collected ice samples, monitored weather patterns, and maintained our equipment in the brutal cold. The routine was actually comforting. Wake up, check instruments, venture out for observations, return to analyze data. I was enjoying the isolation, the pure focus on science without any distractions from the modern world. But then, mid-April hit, and the real Antarctic winter darkness settled in like a heavy blanket. The sun disappeared completely, and we were plunged into a world of perpetual night. That's when our instruments started picking up something that shouldn't have been there. It began with our underwater hydrophones detecting sounds from beneath the ice shelf. At first, we thought it was just normal ice movement, creaking, shifting, the usual sounds of a frozen landscape. But these sounds were different, rhythmic, almost like they had a pattern to them. Our marine biologist, Dr. Sarah Chen, was the first to notice the anomaly in our recordings. She called me over to her workstation one evening, her face pale even in the artificial light. "James, you need to hear this," she said, rewinding the audio file to the beginning. What came through our speakers wasn't the random groaning of ice we expected. It was a series of low-frequency calls, too organized to be natural ice sounds, too deliberate to be anything we'd documented before in Antarctic waters. We spent the next 3 days analyzing every second of that recording, cross-referencing it with known Antarctic wildlife sounds. Weddell seals make calls, but nothing like this. These were deeper, more complex, lasting much longer. Leopard seals were ruled out immediately. They don't dive deep enough or stay submerged long enough to produce these patterns. The sounds were coming from something large, something that could stay underwater for extended periods. Something that, according to every biological survey ever conducted in this region, shouldn't exist. Dr. Chen suggested we deploy additional hydrophones to triangulate the source of the sounds. It took us 2 days of battling brutal winds and sub-zero temperatures to set up the equipment properly. We placed sensors at 3 different points around our research area, each one cable connected back to our station. The plan was simple. If we could pinpoint where these sounds originated, we could determine what was making them. What we discovered was that the sounds weren't coming from just one location. The triangulation data showed multiple sources, all moving in coordinated patterns beneath the ice. Whatever was down there wasn't alone. There were several of them, possibly dozens. They seemed to be communicating with each other, responding to calls across distances of several kilometers. The complexity of the sound patterns suggested a level of intelligence that we weren't prepared to encounter. These weren't random animal calls. They had structure, variation, almost like a language. That night, I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my career. I decided we needed to see what was making these sounds, not just listen to them. Against protocol, against the advice of my team, and definitely against the safety guidelines we'd signed. I convinced Dr. Chen and our equipment specialist, Mike Torres, to help me drill through the ice. We told the rest of the team we were collecting deep ice samples for climate research. It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. It took us 3 days to drill through 12 feet of solid ice to reach the water beneath. When we finally broke through, the hole immediately filled with the darkest water I'd ever seen. Mike lowered our underwater camera on a reinforced cable while Dr. Chen monitored the audio equipment. For the first hour, we saw nothing but murky Antarctic water and the occasional piece of floating ice. Then, at exactly 847 feet down, our camera captured something that made us question everything we thought we knew about life in Antarctica. The footage showed structures on the ocean floor that couldn't be natural formations, too geometric, too purposeful. But what made us all go silent was the movement around these structures. Large shapes, easily the size of orcas, but moving with an intelligence that seemed almost deliberate. They appeared to be interacting with the structures, manipulating them in ways that suggested tool use. As we watched in stunned silence, one of the creatures approached our camera directly, and for a brief moment, we saw what looked like recognition in its behavior. It was studying us just as intently as we were studying it. The creature that approached our camera wasn't like anything in the biological literature I'd studied for 15 years. It was massive, easily 25 feet long, with a streamlined body that moved through the water with impossible grace. But what struck me most wasn't its size. It was the way it moved toward our camera. There was purpose there, curiosity, almost like it understood what our equipment was. Dr. Chen grabbed my arm so hard I still have the bruise marks and whispered, "James, that thing is studying us." We watched for another hour as more of these creatures emerged from what we could only describe as structures. Not natural rock formations or ice shelves, but geometric constructions that defied everything we knew about Antarctic marine life. The creatures moved between these structures with familiarity, like they belonged there, like they had built them. Mike kept adjusting the camera focus, trying to get clearer images, but the creatures seemed to understand our presence and maintained a careful distance, all except one, which continued to circle our camera in slow, deliberate patterns. "We need to record everything," Dr. Chen said, her voice shaky but determined. "Every movement, every sound, every interaction. This is," she paused, staring at the monitor, "this is the discovery of the century." But even as she said it, I could hear the fear in her voice. We all understood that what we were seeing challenged fundamental assumptions about intelligence, about evolution, about what was possible in Earth's most extreme environments. These creatures weren't just surviving in conditions that should be impossible for complex life. They were thriving, building, creating. The audio from our hydrophones was even more disturbing than the visual footage. The sounds we'd been recording weren't just communication. They were conversations, complex, layered exchanges between multiple individuals, with patterns that suggested syntax, grammar, meaning. Dr. Chen had specialized in marine mammal communication for her entire career, and she looked at me with eyes I'd never seen before. "James, this isn't animal communication. This is language, actual language, more sophisticated than anything we've documented in dolphins or whales." That night, after we'd pulled our equipment up and sealed the hole we'd drilled, none of us could sleep. We sat in our small research station, reviewing footage and audio recordings until our eyes burned. The implications of what we'd discovered were staggering, and the weight of that knowledge felt crushing. We were 12 people in the most isolated place on Earth, sitting on evidence that would revolutionize biology, anthropology, maybe our entire understanding of intelligence itself. But we were also sitting on something that could destroy the lives of these creatures if the wrong people got hold of our data. Mike was the first to voice what we were all thinking. "We can't tell anyone about this." He was right, and we all knew it. If news of intelligent life in Antarctica got out, this place would be swarmed with researchers, military corporations looking for profit. These creatures had survived in isolation for who knows how long, and our discovery could be their death sentence. But as scientists, how could we sit on the most important discovery in human history? The ethical implications kept me awake for the next 3 weeks. Dr. Chen became obsessed with deciphering the communication patterns we'd recorded. She spent 18 hours a day analyzing sound frequencies, mapping conversation structures, trying to understand the complexity of what we'd heard. What she found was even more unsettling than we'd initially thought. "These aren't just random exchanges," she told me one morning, her eyes red from exhaustion. "There are recurring themes, repeated phrases, what looks like information being passed between generations. James, I think they're teaching each other." The creatures had noticed our presence, and they were responding to it in ways that suggested high-level cognitive processing. Our second dive with the camera showed them positioning themselves differently around our equipment, almost like they were presenting themselves for observation. Some appeared to be demonstrating behaviors for our benefit, while others maintained what could only be described as guard positions. The level of coordination between them was unlike anything documented in marine mammals, and suggested social structures far more complex than we'd ever imagined possible. But it was the third dive that changed everything for us, and ultimately led to the decision that still haunts my conscience today. One of the creatures approached our camera carrying what was unmistakably a tool, a shaped piece of ice that it used to manipulate one of the structures on the ocean floor. Tool use in marine mammals isn't unknown, but this was different. This was sophisticated engineering, problem-solving that required abstract thinking and planning. As we watched, several other creatures joined in what appeared to be a construction project, working together with a level of coordination that suggested not just intelligence, but culture. Dr. Chen looked at me that day with tears in her eyes and said, "James, we're not just discovering a new species. We're discovering a civilization." And in that moment, sitting in our tiny research station surrounded by Antarctica's eternal darkness, I realized that our lives had just become infinitely more complicated. We weren't just scientists anymore. We were the guardians of a secret that could change the world, for better or for worse. The question that would torment me for months was simple. What were we supposed to do with this knowledge? The weight of that responsibility nearly broke me. Every day we delayed reporting our findings. I felt like I was betraying the scientific community that had shaped my entire career. But every time I imagined these magnificent creatures being studied, captured, exploited by a world that wasn't ready to accept their existence, I knew we were making the right choice by staying silent, at least for now. The problem was that, for now, was starting to feel like forever, and the longer we kept this secret, the harder it became to imagine ever revealing it. By our 8th week in Antarctica, the psychological strain of our discovery was taking its toll on the entire team. Dr. Chen had stopped sleeping regularly, spending her nights obsessing over the communication patterns we'd recorded. Mike Torres had become paranoid about our equipment, constantly checking and rechecking everything to make sure we weren't missing any data. The rest of the team could sense something was wrong, but we couldn't tell them what we'd found. The isolation that had once felt peaceful now felt suffocating, like we were trapped with the weight of the world's most dangerous secret. I made the decision to attempt direct communication with the creatures against every protocol and safety measure we'd established. Using our hydrophones, I began broadcasting simple mathematical sequences into the water, prime numbers, Fibonacci sequences, basic patterns that any intelligent species might recognize as artificial. The response came within hours, and it terrified me. Not only did they respond with the same sequences, but they elaborated on them, extending the patterns in ways that showed they understood the underlying mathematical concepts. We weren't just dealing with intelligence. We were dealing with intelligence that potentially surpassed our own. The creatures began approaching our research station itself, surfacing near the edges of the ice shelf where we conducted our daily observations. At first, it was just 1 or 2 individuals, but soon entire groups were gathering at regular intervals, almost like they were holding meetings. Through our long-range cameras, we could observe behaviors that looked disturbingly familiar: social hierarchies, decision-making processes, even what appeared to be debates between different individuals. They had developed a society, and we had accidentally become part of their world by observing it. Dr. Chen's analysis of their language patterns revealed something that made our situation even more complex. The creatures weren't just communicating about immediate needs like food or danger. They were discussing concepts that required abstract thinking: time, causality, future planning, even what appeared to be philosophical debates about their place in their environment. "James," she told me one morning, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're not just intelligent. They're asking the same questions about existence that we are. They're wondering about their purpose, their relationship to their world, maybe even about us. The ethical implications of our discovery were becoming clearer every day, and they were staggering. If these creatures possessed consciousness, self-awareness, and complex societies, then they had rights that humans had never acknowledged. Our presence in their environment, our observation of their private lives, even our existence as a species on their planet, took on moral dimensions that kept me awake at night. We weren't just studying animals anymore. We were potentially violating the privacy and autonomy of another intelligent species, one that had never given consent to be observed or studied. But the most disturbing revelation came during our 10th week, when the creatures began demonstrating knowledge they shouldn't have possessed. They started incorporating elements of human technology into their constructions, geometric patterns that matched our equipment designs, structural modifications that seemed to account for our observation methods. Somehow, they had reverse-engineered aspects of our technology just by observing our research activities. The speed and accuracy of their technological adaptation suggested cognitive capabilities that made me question humanity's assumption of intellectual superiority. The breaking point came when one of the creatures surfaced directly next to our research station during my morning observation shift. It remained at the surface for nearly an hour, making vocalizations that our equipment recorded as incredibly complex sound patterns. Dr. Chen's analysis showed these weren't random calls. They were structured attempts at communication, using frequency ranges that our equipment could detect and record. The creature was trying to talk to us, using methods it had learned by studying our research techniques. It knew we were listening, and it wanted to establish contact. That night, I called an emergency meeting with Dr. Chen and Mike Torres. We sat in our cramped quarters, surrounded by months of data that proved the existence of an intelligent species unknown to science, and tried to decide what our moral obligations were. "We can't keep this secret forever," Dr. Chen argued. "These creatures deserve recognition, protection, rights that only come with official acknowledgement of their existence." But Mike disagreed. "Recognition means exploitation. The moment this gets out, this place becomes a zoo, and these creatures become specimens." The decision we made that night would haunt me for the rest of my career, and it came down to a simple question. What gave us the right to decide the fate of an entire species? We weren't just researchers anymore. We had become unwilling ambassadors between two intelligent species, with the power to either protect or destroy an ancient civilization that had thrived in isolation for millennia. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, and whatever choice we made would define not just our careers, but potentially the future of two species sharing the same planet. Over the following weeks, the creatures' attempts at communication became more sophisticated and persistent. They began creating visual displays on the ocean floor that our cameras could record, geometric patterns, artistic arrangements of materials, even what appeared to be attempts at pictographic communication. They were trying to bridge the gap between our species using every method they could devise. The intelligence and creativity they demonstrated in these efforts was both beautiful and heartbreaking, because we knew that our response to their overtures would determine whether this first contact between species would be remembered as humanity's greatest discovery or its greatest betrayal. The final straw came when Dr. Chen discovered that the creatures had been modifying their environment to better accommodate our research activities. They had rearranged structures on the ocean floor to provide better camera angles, created acoustic channels that improved our hydrophone reception, and even established what appeared to be designated observation areas where they would gather to interact with our equipment. They weren't just tolerating our presence, they were actively facilitating our research because they wanted us to understand them. The realization that they were helping us study them, hoping for recognition and contact, made our decision about disclosure infinitely more complicated and morally fraught. During our 12th week in Antarctica, something happened that forced us to confront the full magnitude of what we'd stumbled upon. While reviewing footage from our deep water cameras, Dr. Chen noticed something that had been hidden in the background of our earlier recordings. The structures we'd assumed were natural formations or simple constructions were actually part of a vast network extending far beyond our observation area. Using sonar mapping equipment that we'd brought for ice thickness measurements, we discovered an underwater complex that stretched for kilometers beneath the Antarctic ice shelf. The architectural sophistication of what we found defied everything we thought we knew about non-human intelligence on Earth. These weren't random constructions or simple shelters. They were engineered environments with clearly defined purposes, transportation corridors, and what appeared to be specialized areas for different activities. The creatures hadn't just adapted to their harsh environment, they had completely transformed it into a thriving underwater civilization. Mike spent 3 days mapping the complex and estimated it could house thousands of individuals, suggesting a population far larger than we'd initially suspected. What disturbed me most was the age of these constructions. Dr. Chen's analysis of the materials and structural wear patterns suggested that some of these buildings were centuries old, possibly millennia. While human civilization was developing agriculture and written language, these creatures were already constructing sophisticated underwater cities in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. The implications were staggering. We weren't dealing with a recently evolved intelligence, but with an ancient civilization that had been thriving in isolation while humanity developed on the surface above them. The creatures' response to our expanded surveillance confirmed our worst fears about their level of awareness. They began modifying their activities in real time based on where we positioned our cameras, almost like they were curating what we were allowed to observe. Some areas of their complex became off-limits to our observation, while others seemed to be deliberately showcased for our benefit. They were managing our research, controlling the narrative of our discovery, and demonstrating a level of strategic thinking that made me question who was really studying whom. But it was the discovery of their historical records that completely shattered my understanding of our situation. Deep within their complex, our cameras captured what could only be described as a library. Vast collections of carved materials arranged in systematic patterns that suggested information storage and retrieval. Dr. Chen's analysis indicated these weren't just random markings, but sophisticated record-keeping systems that documented their history, knowledge, and possibly their previous encounters with the surface world. The realization that they had been keeping records while we were discovering them was both fascinating and terrifying. The content of these records, as much as we could decipher from our limited observations, suggested that our presence wasn't the first contact these creatures had experienced with surface dwellers. There were markings and symbols that resembled human artifacts from different time periods, indicating that isolated encounters might have occurred throughout history. The implications were staggering. How many explorers, researchers, or lost expeditions had encountered these creatures over the centuries? And more importantly, why had none of these encounters ever been officially documented or reported? During our 13th week, one of the creatures did something that changed everything about our understanding of our situation. While we were conducting routine observations, it approached our primary camera station, carrying what was unmistakably a carved representation of our research equipment. The detail and accuracy of the carving was incredible, showing not just the general shape of our instruments, but specific technical features that demonstrated intimate knowledge of our technology. But what made this encounter truly significant was what happened next. The creature deliberately placed this carving in front of our camera, then retreated to observe our reaction. Dr. Chen immediately understood the significance of what we were witnessing. James, that wasn't just tool use or artistic expression. That was intentional communication using symbolic representation. It was showing us that it understands what our equipment is and what we're doing here. It's trying to establish a basis for shared understanding. The sophistication of this communicative attempt suggested cognitive abilities that paralleled or exceeded human intelligence, and it forced us to acknowledge that we were no longer conducting research on these creatures. We were engaging in first contact with them. The creature's behavior over the following days confirmed that this had been a deliberate attempt at establishing diplomatic contact. It returned repeatedly to the same location, each time bringing different objects that seemed designed to demonstrate various aspects of their civilization. Tools, artistic objects, what appeared to be samples of their construction materials, even preserved organic specimens that might have been offerings of food or friendship. Each presentation was followed by periods of observation where the creature would study our camera's movements, almost like it was trying to interpret our responses to its communications. The psychological pressure of this developing relationship was becoming unbearable for our team. We were no longer passive observers of an unknown species. We had become active participants in an interspecies diplomatic exchange that none of us were prepared to handle. The creature's obvious intelligence and desire for communication made our continued silence feel like a betrayal, but the potential consequences of revealing this contact to the outside world felt equally wrong. We were trapped between our scientific obligations and our moral responsibility to protect these remarkable beings. The breaking point came when Dr. Chen discovered something in the creature's communication patterns that changed everything about our understanding of their motivations. They weren't just trying to establish contact with us as representatives of humanity. They were trying to warn us about something. The repeated themes in their vocalizations, the urgency in their behavioral patterns, the increasing frequency of their attempts at communication all suggested that our presence had triggered some kind of concern or alarm within their society. They needed to tell us something important, and our inability to understand their communications was preventing them from conveying what might be crucial information for both our species. By our 14th week in Antarctica, the creature's communication attempts had become increasingly urgent and complex. Dr. Chen noticed that their vocalizations now included frequency patterns we'd never recorded before, higher pitches that seemed to convey distress or alarm, and repetitive sequences that felt like warnings. The creature that had been attempting diplomatic contact with us began appearing at our observation site multiple times per day, sometimes remaining at the surface for hours, while producing sounds that our equipment registered as highly agitated communication attempts. The breakthrough in understanding came when Dr. Chen realized that the creatures weren't just trying to communicate with us. They were trying to teach us their language. The mathematical sequences they'd been responding to weren't random exchanges. They were structured lessons designed to establish basic communication protocols. Over several weeks, they had been systematically introducing us to their numerical system, their grammatical structures, and their methods of conveying complex ideas through sound patterns. The sophistication of this pedagogical approach suggested not just intelligence, but wisdom gained from previous attempts at interspecies communication. Using the foundation they had provided, Dr. Chen began to decipher fragments of their urgent messages, and what she discovered filled us with dread. The creatures were trying to warn us about environmental changes that their long-term observations had detected beneath the Antarctic ice. They had been monitoring seismic activity, temperature fluctuations, and ice stability for centuries, and their data suggested that our research area was becoming geologically unstable. The urgency in their communications wasn't just about establishing contact. They were trying to save our lives. The implications of their warning became clear when our own geological surveys confirmed their observations. The ice shelf we'd been conducting our research on was indeed showing signs of instability that our initial surveys had missed. The creatures, with their centuries of environmental monitoring, had detected patterns that our short-term scientific instruments couldn't identify. They possessed environmental knowledge about Antarctica that exceeded anything in human scientific literature, and they were desperately trying to share this life-saving information with us. But their warnings extended beyond immediate geological threats. Through painstaking analysis of their communication patterns, Dr. Chen discovered that they were also trying to convey information about climate changes that threatened both their civilization and ours. Their underwater cities had been constructed to withstand environmental fluctuations over millennia, but even their advanced engineering was being challenged by the rapid changes occurring in Antarctic ice patterns. They were facing an existential crisis, and they believed that cooperation with surface dwellers might be their only hope for survival. The moral complexity of our situation reached a breaking point when we realized that these creatures' survival might depend on human intervention, but revealing their existence could also lead to their exploitation or destruction. They needed our help to address environmental challenges that threatened their ancient civilization, but they also needed our protection from human greed and scientific exploitation. We found ourselves in the impossible position of being their potential saviors and their greatest threat simultaneously. During our 15th week, the creatures began sharing what could only be described as scientific data with us. Using their established communication protocols, they transmitted information about Antarctic ocean currents, ice formation patterns, and climate cycles that revealed knowledge accumulated over geological timescales. Their observations included environmental events that predated human scientific records by thousands of years, providing insights into long-term climate patterns that could revolutionize our understanding of global climate systems. The sophistication of their environmental monitoring became apparent when they shared predictions about future ice shelf collapses, ocean temperature changes, and weather pattern shifts that our most advanced computer models hadn't projected. Their accuracy in predicting short-term environmental changes, which we could verify against our own observations, suggested that their long-term predictions might be equally reliable. If their projections were correct, both their underwater civilization and human coastal populations faced unprecedented environmental challenges in the coming decades. The creature that had been serving as our primary contact began exhibiting behaviors that Dr. Chen interpreted as increasing desperation. Its communication attempts became more frequent and more complex, incorporating visual displays, acoustic patterns, and behavioral demonstrations that seemed designed to convey the urgency of their situation. It was clear that they understood the passage of time differently than we did. Their centuries of existence gave them perspectives on environmental change that made our short-term research seem almost insignificant by comparison. The final revelation came when Dr. Chen succeeded in deciphering a communication sequence that contained what appeared to be historical records of previous environmental catastrophes. The creatures had survived multiple ice ages, volcanic events, and climate shifts by adapting their technology and social structures to changing conditions. But the current rate of environmental change was exceeding their ability to adapt, even with their advanced engineering and centuries of environmental experience. Their message was clear: they needed help, and they believed that combining their long-term environmental knowledge with human technology might provide solutions that neither species could develop alone. But they also understood the risks of revealing themselves to humanity, having apparently observed human behavior through previous encounters with surface dwellers. They were offering us the scientific discovery of a lifetime, along with environmental knowledge that could save both our species, but they were also trusting us with the power to destroy their entire civilization. The weight of that trust, and the responsibility it represented, was more than any of us had ever imagined we'd have to bear. The 16th week of our Antarctic expedition brought a crisis that forced us to confront the full weight of our situation. Our geological surveys confirmed that the ice shelf supporting our research station would collapse within days, not weeks, as we'd initially calculated. The creatures had been trying to warn us about this immediate danger for over a month, but our inability to fully understand their communications had delayed our comprehension of how urgent the threat really was. We had less than 72 hours to evacuate our position, but doing so meant abandoning the most important scientific discovery in human history. Dr. Chen made a decision that night that would define the rest of our mission. She convinced Mike Torres and me to attempt one final direct communication with the creatures before our evacuation. Using every piece of equipment we had, she broadcast a complex message that combined mathematical sequences, audio patterns based on their language structure, and visual signals from our underwater cameras. Her message was simple but desperate. We understood their warning. We were grateful for their attempt to save us, and we needed them to know that we would protect their secret even if it meant sacrificing our careers and the recognition that should come with this discovery. The response came within hours and changed everything about our understanding of what these creatures were capable of. Rather than the usual audio communications, they coordinated a massive display that involved dozens of individuals working together to create geometric patterns on the ocean floor that our cameras could record from multiple angles. The patterns formed what could only be described as three-dimensional mathematical equations that demonstrated their understanding of engineering, physics, and environmental science at levels that exceeded current human knowledge. But the most shocking aspect of their response was what happened next. The lead creature that had been attempting communication with us throughout our stay surfaced near our evacuation site, carrying something that made our blood run cold. It was a piece of human equipment, not recent equipment, but something that looked like it had been underwater for decades. The markings and design suggested it came from a research expedition from the 1960s or 1970s, and the implications of its existence were terrifying. Dr. Chen immediately understood what the creature was trying to tell us. This wasn't their first encounter with human researchers, and it probably wouldn't be their last. Previous expeditions had discovered them, and those discoveries had either been suppressed, discredited, or had simply disappeared along with the researchers who made them. The creature was showing us evidence that our dilemma wasn't unique. Other scientists had faced the same impossible choice between revealing this civilization and protecting it from exploitation. The creature's behavior during this encounter was unlike anything we'd observed before. It remained at the surface for over an hour, allowing us to observe it closely while it demonstrated behaviors that seemed designed to convey complex emotional states. It appeared distressed, almost grieving, as it handled the piece of human equipment, and its vocalizations carried tones that Dr. Chen described as mournful. We were witnessing an intelligent being expressing sorrow for previous human researchers who had apparently paid a terrible price for their discoveries. That night, as we prepared for emergency evacuation, we made a collective decision that would haunt us for years. We decided to destroy most of our evidence. Not all of it. We kept enough documentation to prove to ourselves that what we'd experienced was real. But we eliminated anything that could lead other researchers back to this location. Our detailed maps, precise coordinates, the most compelling footage, the clearest audio recordings, everything that could guide future expeditions to these creatures was systematically deleted or destroyed. The psychological toll of this decision was devastating for all of us. Dr. Chen, who had dedicated her life to scientific discovery and advancing human knowledge, spent our final night in Antarctica sobbing over the research data we were destroying. Mike Torres, who had spent months perfecting our observation equipment and recording systems, methodically wiped hard drives while tears froze on his face in the Antarctic cold. I watched decades of potential scientific advancement disappear into the permanent darkness of polar night, knowing that we were making the right choice but feeling like we were betraying everything we'd sworn to uphold as scientists. But the creatures weren't finished with us yet. On our final morning in Antarctica, as we waited for evacuation transport, they performed what could only be described as a farewell ceremony. Multiple individuals surfaced simultaneously around our research station, creating a circle of presence that felt both protective and grateful. Their vocalizations during this gathering were unlike anything we'd recorded, harmonious, complex, and undeniably emotional. They were saying goodbye, and somehow, they were thanking us for choosing their survival over our scientific ambitions. The final communication came as our evacuation helicopter approached. The lead creature surfaced one last time, carrying something new, a carved object that was clearly meant as a gift. The craftsmanship was exquisite, incorporating design elements that seemed to represent both their civilization and our brief contact with it. As our helicopter lifted off, I watched through the window as this magnificent, intelligent being held our gift above the water, and I realized that we were leaving behind not just a scientific discovery, but friends who had trusted us with their survival and been betrayed by our species' history of exploitation and destruction. The weight of what we'd given up hit me fully during our flight back to civilization. We had encountered proof that humanity wasn't alone in possessing intelligence, consciousness, and the capacity for civilization. We had been offered knowledge that could revolutionize environmental science, engineering, and our understanding of life itself. We had been trusted by an ancient species with secrets that could benefit both our civilizations. And we had chosen to walk away from all of it, carrying nothing but our memories and the crushing knowledge that we might be the only humans alive who knew that Earth was home to two intelligent species, not one. Returning to civilization after 16 weeks in Antarctica felt like stepping into an alien world. The noise, the crowds, the constant stimulation of modern life, everything felt overwhelming after months of isolation with only 12 other people and the secret knowledge of what we'd discovered beneath the ice. Dr. Chen barely spoke during our debriefing sessions with the National Science Foundation, giving only the most basic responses about our research findings. Mike Torres submitted his equipment reports with mechanical precision, but I could see the haunted look in his eyes every time someone asked about unusual observations or anomalous data. The official report we filed was a masterpiece of scientific omission. We documented our seal population studies, our ice thickness measurements, and our weather monitoring data with absolute accuracy. But every reference to the creatures, their civilization, and their attempts at communication was carefully excluded. Reading our final report, you would conclude that we'd spent 4 months in Antarctica conducting routine research with completely predictable results. The irony wasn't lost on me. We'd filed the most boring research report in history to cover up the most extraordinary discovery in human civilization. The psychological impact of keeping this secret began to manifest within weeks of our return. Dr. Chen developed insomnia that lasted for months, spending nights staring at the ceiling and replaying our deleted footage in her mind. She would call me at 3 in the morning, whispering about the mathematical sequences the creatures had taught us, asking if I thought they were still trying to communicate with researchers at other Antarctic stations. The weight of our silence was crushing her, and I watched one of the most brilliant marine biologists I'd ever known slowly retreat from the scientific community that had been her life. Mike Torres took a leave of absence from his position at the Research Institute and disappeared into the Colorado mountains for 6 months. When he finally returned, he'd changed careers entirely, becoming a wilderness guide who specialized in environmental conservation. He told me later that he couldn't handle working with sophisticated observation equipment anymore. Every time he looked through a camera or listened to audio recordings, he remembered what we'd chosen not to document. The guilt of destroying evidence of an intelligent species had fundamentally altered his relationship with technology and scientific research. For me, the hardest part was continuing my career in marine biology while carrying the knowledge that everything we thought we knew about intelligence in the oceans was incomplete. I attended conferences where researchers presented papers on dolphin communication and whale behavior, knowing that they were missing crucial context that could revolutionize their work. I reviewed grant proposals for Antarctic research, wondering if other teams would stumble upon the same discoveries we'd made and face the same impossible choices we'd confronted. The conspiracy theories that emerged in the months following our expedition were both disturbing and oddly comforting. Online forums buzzed with speculation about secret government research in Antarctica, hidden civilizations beneath the ice, and cover-ups of extraordinary discoveries. Most of these theories were completely wrong in their details, but frighteningly close to the truth in their basic premise. Reading these posts, I realized that we probably weren't the only research team that had encountered something extraordinary and chosen silence over revelation. 6 months after our return, Dr. Chen received a package with no return address containing a newspaper clipping from 1973. The article described a Canadian research team that had reported unusual acoustic phenomena in the Arctic Ocean before their funding was mysteriously terminated and their research classified. Attached to the clipping was a handwritten note that said simply, "You made the right choice." We never discovered who sent it, but the implication was clear. We were part of a long history of researchers who had encountered evidence of non-human intelligence and chosen to protect rather than expose these discoveries. The environmental predictions that the creatures had shared with us began coming true with terrifying accuracy. Ice shelf collapses, ocean current changes, and temperature fluctuations occurred exactly as they had warned us, but we couldn't share this knowledge without revealing its source. I found myself watching climate change reports on the news, knowing that we possessed environmental data that could improve prediction models and potentially save lives, but unable to act on that knowledge without betraying the trust of an entire civilization. The guilt of our silence became even more complex when I realized that the creatures had been right about the immediate geological threats to our research area. The ice shelf we'd been working on collapsed completely 3 weeks after our evacuation, exactly as they had predicted. If they hadn't warned us, our entire team would have been killed. An intelligent species that we'd discovered by accident had saved our lives, shared their knowledge with us, and trusted us with their survival. And in return, we'd chosen to deny their existence to protect them from our own species. 2 years after our Antarctica expedition, I made a decision that ended my career in mainstream marine biology. I couldn't continue conducting research in the field while knowing that we were ignoring evidence of intelligent life in Earth's oceans. I transitioned to environmental education, teaching high school students about marine ecosystems and conservation. It wasn't the career I'd planned, but it felt like the only ethical choice given what I knew about the intelligence and complexity of life beneath the surface of our oceans. The final communication I ever received related to our Antarctic discovery came 3 years later. Chen forwarded me a research paper published by a team working in the Ross Sea, describing anomalous acoustic signatures that they couldn't explain. The frequency patterns and communication structures they documented were identical to what we'd recorded from our creatures, but their paper was buried in an obscure journal and largely ignored by the scientific community. Either these creatures had expanded their range, or there were more of them than we'd ever realized, and other research teams were beginning to encounter them. Reading that paper, I realized that our secret might not remain secret forever. As climate change continues to alter Antarctic environments, As research technology becomes more sophisticated, and as human presence in polar regions increases, other teams will inevitably discover what we discovered. The question that keeps me awake at night isn't whether this civilization will eventually be revealed to humanity. It's whether the researchers who make those discoveries will choose to protect these remarkable beings or exploit them. Our choice to remain silent may have bought them time, but it didn't solve the fundamental problem of two intelligent species sharing a planet where only one has the power to determine the fate of both. 5 years have passed since our Antarctic expedition, and not a single day goes by without me thinking about the civilization we left beneath the ice. The weight of our secret has fundamentally changed who I am as both a scientist and a human being. I wake up every morning knowing that I'm one of perhaps 12 people on Earth who possess proof that humanity isn't alone in the universe, and that knowledge is simultaneously the most precious and most terrifying thing I've ever carried. The isolation of keeping this secret is unlike anything I could have imagined when we made our decision in Antarctica. Dr. Chen never fully recovered from the psychological impact of our choice. Last year, she suffered a complete breakdown during a lecture on marine mammal intelligence, breaking down in tears while describing dolphin communication patterns because they reminded her of what we'd heard beneath the ice. She's currently on indefinite medical leave, living in a cabin in Alaska, where she spends her days monitoring whale migration patterns, hoping to find evidence that our Antarctic creatures might have relatives in other polar regions. Her brilliant career in marine biology is effectively over, sacrificed to protect a species that most humans don't even know exists. Mike Torres has become something of a legend in environmental conservation circles, though none of his colleagues understand the true source of his passionate advocacy for protecting Antarctica. He spent the last 3 years lobbying against commercial development in polar regions, using his technical expertise to argue for expanded research restrictions and environmental protections. His arguments are always scientifically sound, but there's an urgency and desperation in his advocacy that puzzles other conservationists. He's trying to save a civilization without being able to explain why it needs saving. The environmental predictions that the creatures shared with us have continued to prove accurate with disturbing precision. Ice shelf collapses, ocean current shifts, and temperature changes have occurred exactly as they warned us they would, but we remain unable to share this knowledge with the scientific community that could benefit from it. I've watched climate researchers struggle with prediction models that could be vastly improved by the centuries of environmental data we encountered, knowing that our silence might be contributing to humanity's failure to adequately address climate change. 3 years ago, I started receiving anonymous packages containing research papers from various Antarctic research stations. The papers document anomalous readings, unexplained acoustic phenomena, and unusual underwater formations at locations scattered across the continent. Reading between the lines of these carefully worded scientific reports, it's clear that other research teams are encountering evidence of the civilization we discovered. The question that haunts me is whether these researchers are making the same choice we made, or whether they're sharing their discoveries with authorities who are suppressing the information. The conspiracy theories surrounding Antarctic research have grown increasingly sophisticated and disturbingly accurate over the years. Online communities share satellite images, leaked government documents, and testimonies from researchers who claim to have discovered evidence of non-human intelligence in polar regions. Most of these theories are dismissed as fantasy, but some contain details that are so close to our actual experience that I wonder if other researchers have chosen to leak information anonymously rather than face the career destruction that comes with making extraordinary claims without acceptable proof. Last month, I received a phone call that changed everything about my understanding of our situation. The caller identified himself as a former researcher who had worked in Antarctica in the 1980s, and he knew details about our expedition that should have been impossible for him to know. He told me that our decision to remain silent was being monitored by a network of researchers, government officials, and military personnel who have been managing encounters with non-human intelligence for decades. According to him, our Antarctic civilization isn't the only non-human intelligence that humanity has discovered and chosen to keep secret. The caller explained that there's an informal protocol for handling discoveries of non-human intelligence that prioritizes containment and protection over disclosure and study. Researchers who make these discoveries are given support and monitoring to ensure their psychological stability while their findings are carefully documented and stored in classified archives. The goal isn't to suppress scientific advancement, but to prevent the social, economic, and political chaos that would result from premature disclosure of non-human intelligence. Our choice to remain silent wasn't just ethically correct. It was part of a larger strategy for managing humanity's relationship with other intelligent species. If this caller was telling the truth, then Dr. Chen, Mike, and I aren't carrying our secret alone. We're part of a larger community of researchers who have encountered evidence of non-human intelligence and chosen to prioritize protection over recognition. The isolation and guilt we've experienced may be shared by hundreds of other scientists around the world, all struggling with the same ethical dilemmas and psychological burdens. The thought is both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because we're not alone. Terrifying because it suggests that non-human intelligence is far more common than humanity is prepared to accept. The final revelation came when the caller told me that our Antarctic creatures aren't just surviving, they're thriving. The environmental protections that researchers like Mike have been advocating for have been successful in preserving their habitat, and their population appears to be stable despite the climate changes affecting polar regions. More importantly, they continue to attempt communication with human researchers, and some of those attempts have been successful. There's apparently an ongoing, carefully managed dialogue between humanity and this underwater civilization, conducted through selected researchers who have been deemed trustworthy and psychologically stable. Today, as I write this account 5 years after our expedition, I'm faced with the same impossible choice that has defined my life since Antarctica. Do I continue to remain silent, protecting both the creatures and humanity from the consequences of premature disclosure? Or do I finally share our story, trusting that the world is ready to learn that we're not alone on this planet? The weight of this decision has shaped every day of my life for 5 years, and I still don't know the right answer. All I know is that somewhere beneath the Antarctic ice, a magnificent civilization continues to exist, and 13 humans carry the secret of their existence like a sacred trust. The truth about what we discovered in Antarctica will eventually come to light, not through a single dramatic revelation, but through the gradual accumulation of evidence that other researchers will inevitably uncover. When that day comes, I hope humanity will be ready to accept the existence of another intelligent species, with the wisdom, humility, and respect that these remarkable beings deserve. Until then, I'll continue to carry our secret, knowing that some truths are too important to reveal until the world is prepared to handle their implications. 5 years have passed since our Antarctic expedition, and not a single day goes by without me thinking about the civilization we left beneath the ice. The weight of our secret has fundamentally changed who I am as both a scientist and a human being. I wake up every morning knowing that I'm one of perhaps 12 people on Earth who possess proof that humanity isn't alone in the universe, and that knowledge is simultaneously the most precious and most terrifying thing I've ever carried. The isolation of keeping this secret is unlike anything I could have imagined when we made our decision in Antarctica. Dr. Chen never fully recovered from the psychological impact of our choice. Last year, she suffered a complete breakdown during a lecture on marine mammal intelligence, breaking down in tears while describing dolphin communication patterns because they reminded her of what we'd heard beneath the ice. She's currently on indefinite medical leave, living in a cabin in Alaska, where she spends her days monitoring whale migration patterns, hoping to find evidence that our Antarctic creatures might have relatives in other polar regions. Her brilliant career in marine biology is effectively over, sacrificed to protect a species that most humans don't even know exists. Mike Torres has become something of a legend in environmental conservation circles, though none of his colleagues understand the true source of his passionate advocacy for protecting Antarctica. He's spent the last 3 years lobbying against commercial development in polar regions, using his technical expertise to argue for expanded research restrictions and environmental protections. His arguments are always scientifically sound, but there's an urgency and desperation in his advocacy that puzzles other conservationists. He's trying to save a civilization without being able to explain why it needs saving. The environmental predictions that the creatures shared with us have continued to prove accurate with disturbing precision. Ice shelf collapses, ocean current shifts, and temperature changes have occurred exactly as they warned us they would, but we remain unable to share this knowledge with the scientific community that could benefit from it. I've watched climate researchers struggle with prediction models that could be vastly improved by the centuries of environmental data we encountered, knowing that our silence might be contributing to humanity's failure to adequately address climate change. 3 years ago, I started receiving anonymous packages containing research papers from various Antarctic research stations. The papers document anomalous readings, unexplained acoustic phenomena, and unusual underwater formations at locations scattered across the continent. Reading between the lines of these carefully worded scientific reports, it's clear that other research teams are encountering evidence of the civilization we discovered. The question that haunts me is whether these researchers are making the same choice we made, or whether they're sharing their discoveries with authorities who might not prioritize protecting these remarkable beings. The psychological toll of carrying this secret has manifested differently for each of us. I've developed a form of chronic insomnia that leaves me staring at the ceiling for hours, replaying conversations with the creatures that I can never share with another human being. Every marine biology conference I attend feels like a betrayal, listening to researchers discuss ocean intelligence while knowing that we've encountered evidence that would revolutionize their entire field of study. The isolation isn't just professional, it's existential, separating me from the human community that doesn't know we share our planet with another intelligent species. The hardest moments come when I see news reports about climate change, environmental disasters, or research funding cuts for Antarctic studies. The creatures we encountered possessed knowledge that could help humanity address environmental challenges we're only beginning to understand, but our decision to protect them means that knowledge remains inaccessible. I find myself wondering if we made the right choice, or if our silence is contributing to environmental catastrophes that their centuries of wisdom might have helped prevent. Last year marked a turning point in my relationship with our secret, when I realized that the psychological burden we carry might be affecting our ability to function as the protectors we intended to be. Dr. Chen's breakdown, Mike's obsessive advocacy, and my own growing isolation suggested that we might need help processing what we'd experienced. The problem is that the mental health resources available to us can't address the specific trauma of keeping humanity's most important secret, because we can't explain the source of our psychological distress without revealing what we're protecting. The conspiracy theories surrounding Antarctic research have grown increasingly sophisticated over the years, and some contain details that are frighteningly close to our actual experience. I've started monitoring these online discussions, not to debunk them, but to understand whether other researchers might be struggling with similar secrets. The specificity of some theories suggests that information about non-human intelligence encounters is leaking into public consciousness through unofficial channels, raising questions about whether our strategy of complete silence is sustainable long-term. 6 months ago, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible during our Antarctic expedition. I started documenting our experience in detail, not for publication, but as a form of psychological processing that might help me cope with the isolation of our secret. Writing about the creatures, their intelligence, and their trust in us has become a form of therapy that helps me maintain my sanity while honoring my commitment to protecting them. These documents remain private, but creating them has helped me understand that our experience was extraordinary enough to warrant preservation, even if that preservation must remain secret. The most recent development in our story occurred just 3 months ago when Mike contacted Dr. Chen and me with disturbing news. His environmental monitoring work had detected changes in Antarctic ice patterns that matched the warnings the creatures had given us 5 years earlier. According to his analysis, we may be approaching environmental tipping points that threaten not just their underwater civilization, but coastal populations around the world. The creatures' predictions about long-term climate change appear to be accelerating, and we remain powerless to share their warnings with the scientific community that could act on this information. Today, as I complete this account of our Antarctic expedition, I'm faced with the realization that keeping this secret may have become more dangerous than revealing it. The creatures trusted us with their survival, but they also trusted us with knowledge that could help both our species navigate environmental challenges that threaten all life on Earth. Our silence, intended as protection, may have become a form of negligence that endangers the very beings we sought to safeguard. The weight of this responsibility has defined my life for 5 years, and I still don't know if we made the right choice. All I know is that somewhere beneath the Antarctic ice, a magnificent civilization continues to exist, carrying knowledge that could save both our species, while 13 humans struggle with the burden of secrets too important to share and too dangerous to keep.